Mom, the house is mine now. You have until Friday to pack your things. Those words shattered my world in an instant. After 40 years of teaching, after sacrificing everything for my son David, I found myself staring across my own kitchen table at the man I raised, watching him smile as he handed me eviction papers. Standing beside him, his wife Veronica nodded sympathetically, already planting seeds about my failing memory. I thought I knew betrayal, but nothing prepared me for this moment when family became enemy. Stay with me until the end of this story. It's not what you think. And comment below with your city so I can see how far this tale of justice has traveled. The morning started like any other Thursday in my quiet suburban home in Millfield. I was 67 years old, recently retired from 4 decades of teaching high school English, and finally enjoying the peace I'd earned. My late husband Robert's garden was blooming beautifully. His roses still climbed the white picket fence he'd built with his own hands before the cancer took him 3 years ago. The kitchen still smelled faintly of the cinnamon rolls I'd baked for David and Veronica's visit, a weekly tradition I cherished. I should have known something was wrong when David arrived without his usual warm hug. Instead, he sat rigidly across from me at the oak dining table Robert had crafted in his workshop, his wife Veronica perched beside him like a perfectly manicured vulture. Her designer purse sat on my grandmother's lace tablecloth, and something about the way she avoided my eyes made my stomach churn. "Mom, we need to talk," David began, his voice carrying none of the warmth I remembered from the little boy who used to run to me with scraped knees and broken toys. This was the voice he used in his investment firm meetings, cold, professional, detached. "Of course, honey. What's on your mind?" I poured coffee into the cups Robert and I had received as a wedding gift 42 years ago, my hands steady despite the growing unease in my chest. Veronica cleared her throat, a sound I'd grown to despise over the 5 years she'd been part of our family. "Eleanor, we're concerned about you living alone in this big house. It's too much responsibility, and with your memory issues, memory issues." The words hit me like a physical blow. What memory issues? I'm as sharp as I've ever been. David leaned forward, his expression a mask of false concern. "Mom, last week you called me 3 times asking if we were still coming for dinner. You forgot you'd invited the Hendersons over. Mrs. Patterson next door mentioned you've been leaving your sprinkler on all night." Each word was carefully chosen, precisely delivered, and completely fabricated. I remembered every conversation, every dinner plan, every interaction with crystal clarity. My mind raced, trying to understand why my son, my only child, the boy I'd raised alone after his father died when David was just 16, would lie to me with such calculated cruelty. "That's not true, David. None of that happened." My voice remained steady, but inside something was cracking. Veronica reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. "We've been talking to some specialists about the best care options. There's a lovely assisted living facility just 20 minutes from here. You'd have your own apartment meals, provided activities with people your own age." "You want to put me in a home?" The words came out as a whisper. "It's not putting you anywhere, Mom. It's ensuring you get the care you need." David's rehearsed response rolled off his tongue too easily. How long had they been planning this conversation? I sat back in my chair, studying the 2 people across from me. David had always been ambitious, but when had ambition transformed into this cold calculation? And Veronica, I'd tried so hard to welcome her into our family, to love her as the daughter I'd never had. Her smile had always felt forced, but I'd attributed it to nervousness, to wanting to fit in. "I don't need care," I said firmly. "I'm perfectly capable of maintaining my own home, managing my own affairs. I just retired 6 months ago. I'm hardly decrepit." David sighed heavily, as if dealing with a particularly difficult child. "Mom, be reasonable. This house is too big, too expensive to maintain. The property taxes alone are eating up your pension. And what if something happens? What if you fall? What if you forget to turn off the stove? I've lived in this house for 35 years. Your father and I bought it when you were 8 years old. You learned to ride your bike in this driveway. You built that treehouse in the backyard with your dad. My voice caught slightly at the memories. This is my home. Was your home? Veronica corrected gently, but her eyes were ice cold. Things change, Eleanor. People's needs change as they age. I haven't aged that much in 6 months. I snapped my teacher's authority creeping into my tone. And my needs haven't changed at all. David reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a legal document. The papers rustled as he unfolded them, the sound unnaturally loud in my suddenly silent kitchen. Actually, Mom, that's not entirely accurate. You see, there have been some changes, financial changes. My blood turned to ice water. What kind of changes? The house deed, Mom. You transferred ownership to me 6 months ago. Don't you remember? You said you wanted to make sure everything was settled, that you didn't want me to have to deal with probate and legal complications later. The world tilted sideways. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles turning white. I did no such thing. I would never transfer ownership of this house without discussing it thoroughly, without involving my attorney. Your attorney was involved, Veronica said smoothly. Richard Harmon handled all the paperwork. Very professional, very thorough. Richard Harmon had been Robert's best friend since college. He'd been best man at our wedding, David's godfather, and our family attorney for 25 years. If anyone would have my best interests at heart, it would be Richard. But I hadn't spoken to Richard in months, not since settling Robert's final estate matters. I want to see those papers, I demanded. David slid the document across the table. My signature stared back at me from the bottom of the page, but something about it looked wrong. The loops were too perfect, the pressure too even. My real signature had evolved over the years, becoming more hurried, less precise, as arthritis crept into my fingers. This looked like my signature from 20 years ago. This isn't right, I said, staring at the document. I never signed this. I would remember signing this. Mom, David's voice took on a patronizing tone that made me want to slap him. This is exactly what we're talking about, the memory issues. They're getting worse. There are no memory issues. I slammed my hand on the table, causing the coffee cups to rattle. My memory is fine. I remember every student I taught last semester, every book I assigned, every parent conference I held. I remember what I had for breakfast this morning, what I watched on television last night, what I planted in the garden this week. My memory is perfect. Veronica and David exchanged a look, a quick, meaningful glance that spoke volumes. They'd expected this reaction. They'd planned for it. Eleanor, Veronica's voice was honey-sweet poison. Getting upset isn't going to help anyone. We know this is difficult, but denial is often the first stage of accepting cognitive decline. Cognitive decline? I stood up so quickly my chair scraped against the hardwood floor. How dare you? How dare both of you sit in my kitchen, eat my food, and tell me I'm losing my mind? Mom, please sit down. David's voice was calm, controlled, infuriating. Let's discuss this rationally. Rationally, you want to discuss this rationally. I began pacing around the kitchen, my mind racing. Rationally, I would ask why my son, who I raised alone after his father died, who I put through college by working 2 jobs, who I supported through his early business ventures, would suddenly claim ownership of my home. Rationally, I would wonder why he's doing this with a wife who has never shown me anything but barely concealed contempt. That's not fair, Eleanor, Veronica protested, but her mask was slipping. For just a moment, I saw something ugly flash across her perfectly made-up face. Fair? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to talk about fair would be my son visiting me because he loves me, not because he's plotting to steal my home. We're not stealing anything, so, David said sharply. The house is legally mine. You signed it over. I did not sign anything. I grabbed the papers from the table, studying them more closely. The date was 6 months ago, supposedly a Thursday afternoon in March. I remembered that Thursday perfectly. I'd been substitute teaching for Mrs. Chen, who'd had the flu. I was at Lincoln High School from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., supervising her advanced placement English classes. I had the substitute teacher forms to prove it. David, I said quietly, On this date, March 15th, I was working at Lincoln High School all day. I have documentation. Mom, you retired in February. You haven't been substitute teaching. Another lie. I had retired from my full-time position, but I'd continued accepting substitute assignments through the spring semester. I had the pay stubs, the thank you notes from students, the memories of helping Maria Rodriguez understand Hamlet's soliloquies and watching Thomas Kim finally grasp the symbolism in The Great Gatsby. Call Lincoln High School, I challenged. Call the substitute coordinator, Mrs. Williams. Ask her if Eleanor Patterson worked on March 15th. Veronica shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Eleanor, even if you were substitute teaching, that doesn't mean you couldn't have signed papers before or after work. Memory can be tricky, especially when we're under stress. The gaslighting was so smooth, so professional, I almost admired its efficiency. Almost. If it hadn't been destroying my life. Get out, I said quietly. Mom, get out of my house. My voice was still controlled, but steel had crept into it. Both of you, now. Eleanor, we understand you're upset, but get out! I roared, my teacher's voice echoing off the kitchen walls. Get out of my house before I call the police. David stood slowly, pocketing the deed papers. Mom, the house isn't yours anymore. Legally, you're living here at my discretion, and that discretion ends on Friday. Friday. This Friday, 3 days from now. We've already arranged for movers to help you pack your personal belongings. The Sunset Manor has a lovely room waiting for you. Veronica has taken care of all the arrangements. Of course she had. Efficient, controlling Veronica had arranged my entire future without consulting me. You can take your furniture, your clothes, your photos, David continued in that horrible, reasonable tone. But the house, the appliances, Dad's tools in the garage, all of that stays. Your father's tools. Now he'd crossed a line I didn't know existed. Those tools belong to Robert Patterson, my husband of 39 years. They have nothing to do with you. Actually, they do. Dad left everything to you, and you've now transferred everything to me. It's all very legal, very proper. I stared at this stranger wearing my son's face. Where was the boy who'd cried when his goldfish died? Where was the teenager who'd brought me dandelions from the yard because he couldn't afford flowers from the store? Where was the young man who'd hugged me at his college graduation and whispered, "None of this would have been possible without you, Mom"? I need to call Richard, I said, reaching for my phone. Of course, David said smoothly. Call Richard. He'll confirm everything. The confidence in his voice chilled me to the bone. Either Richard was in on this conspiracy, or they'd managed to fool him too. Neither option was particularly comforting. As they gathered their things to leave, Veronica paused by the kitchen counter where I kept my medications. Eleanor, are you remembering to take your blood pressure medication? It's so important at our age to stay consistent with prescriptions. I don't take blood pressure medication. My blood pressure is fine. Another meaningful look between husband and wife. The bottle right here says otherwise, Veronica said, pointing to a prescription bottle I'd never seen before. I picked up the bottle. The label was in my name, prescribed by Dr. Martinez, my doctor for high blood pressure. The prescription was dated 2 months ago. I didn't fill this prescription, I said slowly. I don't have high blood pressure. Mom, David's voice was infinitely patient. Dr. Martinez has been concerned about your blood pressure for months. Don't you remember the appointment in July when he specifically said you needed medication? I did remember the July appointment. Dr. Martinez had checked my blood pressure 120/80, perfectly normal for my age. He'd complimented me on my excellent health and told me to keep doing whatever I was doing. You're both lying, I said flatly, about everything. The house, the medication, my memory, all lies. Eleanor, Veronica sighed dramatically, this denial isn't healthy. Perhaps we should schedule an appointment with Dr. Martinez tomorrow just to check in. I'll be scheduling my own appointments, thank you. David kissed my forehead before leaving the gesture so familiar and yet so foreign that I flinched. We love you, Mom. This is all for your own good. After they left, I sat in my kitchen for an hour, staring at the fake prescription bottle and the coffee cups that still held the remnants of our civilized conversation. The afternoon light slanted through Robert's rose garden, casting long shadows across the floor where David had learned to walk, where we'd celebrated birthdays and holidays, and all the small victories that make up a life. My hands weren't shaking anymore. The initial shock had passed, replaced by something much more dangerous clarity. I walked through my house, really looking at it for the first time in months. In the living room, several family photographs were missing from the mantelpiece. Photos of David's childhood, of Robert and me at various anniversaries of family gatherings. When had they disappeared? In their place were generic landscape prints that I didn't recognize. In Robert's study, his favorite leather chair looked different. The arms were less worn, the color slightly off. Someone had replaced it with a similar but newer chair. Why the kitchen seemed wrong, too. My grandmother's china was missing from the hutch, replaced by a set I'd never seen before. The good silver, my mother's silver, passed down through 3 generations, was gone from the dining room buffet. How long had this been going on? How many visits had David and Veronica made where they'd quietly removed pieces of my life, replacing them with cheaper alternatives, banking on the assumption that I wouldn't notice, or worse, that if I did notice, no one would believe me because of my supposed memory issues. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom and opened Robert's dresser drawers. Empty, completely empty. His clothes, his watch, his wedding ring all gone. When I'd organized his things after the funeral, I'd carefully folded his favorite sweaters, his work shirts, his weekend khakis. I'd kept them because they still smelled like him, because sometimes I needed to touch something he'd touched. Now there was nothing. I sank onto our bed, my bed now, and finally allowed myself to cry. Not the gentle tears of grief I'd shed for Robert, but the harsh, angry sobs of betrayal. My son, the child I'd devoted my life to raising, was systematically erasing my husband's memory and stealing my home, and he was using my love for him as a weapon against me. But as I cried, something else was happening in my mind. The teacher in me, the woman who'd spent 40 years dealing with difficult students and manipulative parents, was analyzing the situation. David and Veronica had made several mistakes. First, they'd underestimated my memory. I might be 67, but my mind was as sharp as it had ever been. I could prove I was substitute teaching on the day I allegedly signed the deed. I could document every lie they'd told me. Second, they'd moved too fast. If they'd been more patient, more subtle, they might have gotten away with it. But their greed or their desperation had made them sloppy. Third, and most importantly, they didn't know about the money. 6 months ago, when I'd first started noticing small things going missing from the house, when Veronica's questions about my finances had become too pointed, when David had started showing up with real estate brochures for senior communities just to look at, I'd visited Richard Harmon, not to transfer the house deed, I'd never do such a thing, but to protect myself. Robert had left me well provided for. In addition to his life insurance and pension, we'd invested carefully throughout our marriage. The house was paid off, and I had nearly $800,000 in various accounts. It was more than enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life. But sitting in Richard's office that day, looking at Veronica's newest real estate brochure, I'd had a premonition. Maybe it was intuition, maybe it was paranoia, but I'd asked Richard to help me move the bulk of my assets into a trust that David couldn't access or even know about. Just in case, I'd told Richard. Just in case something happens to my judgment or someone tries to take advantage. Richard, bless him, hadn't asked too many questions. He'd simply nodded and drawn up the papers. As far as the world knew, Eleanor Patterson had about $50,000 in checking and savings accounts, enough to live on modestly, not enough to make her a target for financial exploitation. The other $750,000 was safely tucked away in a trust that matured when I turned 70, with Richard as the trustee and my grandson Ethan as the beneficiary if anything happened to me. David and Veronica thought they were stealing from a vulnerable elderly woman with limited resources. They had no idea they were tangling with someone who had both the means and the motivation to fight back. I picked up my phone and dialed Richard's number. Eleanor. His warm voice was exactly what I needed to hear. How wonderful to hear from you. I was just thinking about you and Robert yesterday. How are you doing? Richard, I need your help. David claims I signed over the house deed to him 6 months ago. He says you handled the paperwork. Silence on the other end of the line. Then, Eleanor, I haven't prepared any documents for you since we set up the trust. I certainly haven't handled any deed transfers. Relief flooded through me. So you didn't witness my signature on a deed transfer in March? Absolutely not. Eleanor, what's going on? I told him everything, the forged deed, the missing photographs, the fake prescription, the 3-day eviction notice. Richard listened without interrupting, but I could hear his breathing getting heavier with each detail. Eleanor, he said finally, this is elder abuse, financial exploitation, fraud. What David is doing is not just morally reprehensible, it's criminal. What do I do? First, don't panic. You're not going anywhere on Friday. Second, I'm going to make some calls. I want to see that deed, examine the signature. Third, we're going to document everything, every lie, every theft, every attempt at manipulation. Richard, there's something else. Things have been disappearing from the house for months. Jewelry, photographs, furniture. I think they've been stealing from me, gradually replacing things with cheap alternatives. Do you have any proof, receipts, photographs of the missing items? I thought about it. Some. I have photos of family gatherings where you can see the missing furniture in the background. I have the insurance documentation for my grandmother's china and my mother's silver. And Richard, I have something else. I've been keeping a journal since Robert died. I write in it every day. If I'm having memory issues, like they claim it would show up in my writing, wouldn't it? Inconsistencies, gaps, confusion. That's brilliant, Eleanor. That journal could be crucial evidence of your mental competency. We talked for another 30 minutes, developing a strategy. Richard would examine the deed tomorrow morning and contact his forensic document expert. I would photograph everything in the house, document what was missing, and continue writing in my journal. Most importantly, I would pretend to go along with their plan. Let them think they've won, Richard advised. Let them think you're a confused, helpless old woman who's accepting defeat. Meanwhile, we'll be gathering evidence. After I hung up, I felt like myself again for the first time in hours. The scared, confused woman who'd sat at the kitchen table had been replaced by the teacher who'd faced down hostile parents and difficult administrators, the widow who'd rebuilt her life after losing her husband, the mother who'd raised a son alone while working multiple jobs. David and Veronica had picked the wrong victim. I spent the evening going through the house room by room, photographing everything and making detailed notes. In my bedroom, I opened the safe Robert had installed behind our wedding portrait. My grandmother's diamond earrings were gone, along with my mother's pearl necklace and the gold watch Robert had given me for our 25th anniversary. In their place were cheap costume jewelry replicas. How had they gotten the combination to the safe? I'd changed it after Robert's death, using the date of David's birth, a sentimental choice that now seemed foolish. They must have guessed it, or maybe David had watched me open it during one of his visits. I documented everything, photographing the fake jewelry, the empty spaces where precious items should have been, the subtle signs of their systematic theft. Then I sat at Robert's desk and wrote in my journal, chronicling every detail of the day's events. My handwriting was steady, my thoughts clear and organized. If David wanted to claim I had cognitive decline, he'd have to explain why my journal entries showed no signs of confusion or memory loss. As I wrote, I found myself thinking about my grandson, Ethan. He was 18 now, a freshman at State University studying engineering like his grandfather. David rarely brought him to visit anymore, claiming he was too busy with school. But Ethan had always been close to me, and I suspected he had no idea what his parents were planning. What would Ethan think when he learned his father had stolen from his grandmother? How would this affect their relationship? The thought of losing Ethan, too, was almost more painful than David's betrayal. I closed the journal and went to bed, but sleep was elusive. Every creak of the house settling, every whisper of wind in the trees outside made me wonder if David and Veronica would return in the night to steal more of my belongings. But along with the fear and hurt, there was something else growing inside me: anticipation. They thought they'd outmaneuvered a helpless old woman. They had no idea what was coming. Friday was 3 days away, 3 days to gather evidence to prepare my counterattack to show David and Veronica what happened when you underestimated Eleanor Patterson. I'd spent 40 years teaching teenagers that actions have consequences. It was time to give my son the most important lesson of his life. The next morning arrived with deceptive normalcy. Birds sang in Robert's garden, sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, and the coffee maker gurgled to life just as it had every morning for 35 years. But everything had changed overnight. I was no longer Eleanor Patterson, retired teacher enjoying her golden years. I was Eleanor Patterson, woman under siege. And today the real battle began. At exactly 9 o'clock, Richard's car pulled into my driveway. Through the window, I watched him gather a briefcase and manila folders, the armor of legal warfare. His expression was grim as he walked up the front path, but when he saw me watching, he managed a reassuring smile. "Eleanor," he said as I opened the door, "you look better than I expected after yesterday's ambush." I had a good night's sleep and a strong cup of coffee. Amazing what clarity can do for a person. I led him into the kitchen where I'd laid out the forged deed alongside my journal and the photographs I'd taken the night before. Richard examined the deed first, holding it up to the light, studying the signature with a magnifying glass he'd brought. "This is good work," he admitted grudgingly. "Professional quality forgery, but it's not perfect." He pointed to several spots on the page. "The paper stock is wrong. This is regular copy paper, not the watermarked legal stock my office uses. The notary seal is slightly off-center, and most importantly, the signature." He pulled out a folder containing documents I'd signed for the trust setup. "Your real signature has changed since your arthritis developed. It's less fluid now, more careful. This forged signature is too smooth, too confident. It's your signature from 15 years ago. So you can prove it's fake. I can prove it didn't come from my office, and I can prove it wasn't signed by you recently. That should be enough to invalidate it legally." He paused, studying my face. "Eleanor, there's something else. I made some calls yesterday evening after we spoke. Do you know why David might be desperate for money right now?" A chill ran down my spine. "What did you find?" "His investment firm is in trouble, serious trouble. 3 clients have filed complaints with the SEC in the past 6 months claiming their money has disappeared. There's talk of an investigation." The coffee cup slipped from my fingers, shattering on the kitchen floor. I stared at Richard, trying to process what he'd just told me. "Are you saying David is stealing from his clients?" "I'm saying there are allegations. Very serious allegations. Eleanor, if those allegations are true, David could be facing federal charges, prison time. And if he's been using client money inappropriately, he needs my money to cover his losses." I finished the pieces clicking into place. "The house, my investments, everything. He's not just being cruel. He's desperate." Richard nodded grimly. "A desperate man is a dangerous man, Eleanor. We need to be very careful how we handle this." I cleaned up the broken coffee cup while my mind raced. Everything made sense now: David's sudden interest in my finances, Veronica's pointed questions about my assets, the urgency of their timeline. They weren't just stealing from me out of greed. They were trying to avoid prison. "What about Ethan?" I asked suddenly. "Does he know what his father is doing?" "I doubt it. From what I can tell, David's been very careful to keep his business problems separate from his family life. Ethan probably has no idea his father is in trouble." My heart ached for my grandson. He was about to learn that his father was not the successful businessman he'd always believed him to be, but a criminal who'd stolen from both clients and family. How do you recover from that kind of betrayal? "Richard, I need to see Ethan before this all comes out. I need him to hear the truth from me, not from some news report or court filing." That might not be safe, Eleanor, if David realizes we're onto him. He already thinks he's won. As far as he knows, I'm a confused old woman who's accepting defeat. I can use that. Richard studied me for a long moment. You have a plan. I'm developing one. But first, I need more evidence. I need to understand exactly what David and Veronica have been doing, how long they've been planning this, how much they've already stolen. We spent the next 2 hours going through every room in the house, documenting missing items and suspicious replacements. The scope of their theft was breathtaking. They'd been systematically looting my home for at least a year, taking anything of value and replacing it with cheap imitations gambling that I wouldn't notice, or that no one would believe me if I did. This isn't amateur hour, Richard observed as we examined a fake version of Robert's antique pocket watch. They've been very careful, very methodical. Someone coached them on how to do this without getting caught. Veronica, I said immediately, this has her fingerprints all over it. David might be desperate, but he's not naturally deceptive. Veronica is. What do you know about her background? I realized how little I actually knew about my daughter-in-law. She worked in real estate before marrying David. She was very successful, according to him. But now that I think about it, she stopped working right after the wedding. She claimed David wanted her to be a full-time wife and mother, but they never had children. I'll have my investigator look into her background. If she has experience with real estate transactions, she'd know exactly how to forge a deed transfer. After Richard left, promising to have the document expert examine the deed that afternoon, I sat in Robert's study and tried to think like my enemies. What was their end game? They had the forged deed. But that was just the beginning. To truly steal my life savings, they'd need access to my bank accounts, my investment portfolios, my insurance policies. The thought sent me rushing to the filing cabinet where I kept important documents. My hands shook as I rifled through the folders, checking that everything was still there. Banking statements, investment records, insurance policies, all present. But something felt wrong. I pulled out my most recent bank statement and studied it carefully. According to the document, my checking account balance was $47,832, but I distinctly remembered having closer to $52,000 the last time I'd checked. I grabbed the previous month's statement. The balance showed a steady decline over the past 6 months, small amounts here and there, never more than a few $100s at a time, but adding up to thousands. Unauthorized withdrawals. They'd been siphoning money from my accounts, gradually hoping I wouldn't notice the small amounts disappearing. But how had they gotten access to my accounts? The answer came to me in a flash of memory. Last Christmas, Veronica had offered to help me set up online banking. It's so much more convenient than going to the bank every time, she'd said. Let me show you how to do it on your computer. I'd been reluctant. I preferred handling my banking in person, but she'd been so insistent, so helpful. She'd sat right here in Robert's study at his computer, setting up accounts and passwords. She'd written down all my information so I wouldn't forget it. I thought she was being thoughtful. In reality, she'd been stealing my login credentials. My hands shaking with rage, I called my bank immediately. Mrs. Patterson, the customer service representative said after I'd verified my identity, I see you've been quite active with online banking recently, several transfers and withdrawals over the past few months. I haven't used online banking at all, I said. Someone has been accessing my accounts without permission. There was a pause. Ma'am, I'm looking at the login records. All the activity originated from an IP address registered to your home address. Are you saying someone in your household has been using your accounts? My household, David and Veronica. Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. I want to change all my passwords immediately and put a freeze on any transfers or large withdrawals. We can certainly do that, Mrs. Patterson. But I should warn you, if someone has had access to your accounts for an extended period, they may have gathered enough information to attempt identity theft or other forms of fraud. After 20 minutes on the phone with the bank, I changed every password, set up fraud alerts, and requested copies of all transaction records for the past year. The customer service representative promised to flag my accounts for suspicious activity and require in-person verification for any major changes, but the damage was already done. According to the records they read to me over the phone, David and Veronica had stolen nearly $15,000 from my checking and savings accounts over the past 8 months. Small amounts carefully timed, never enough to trigger automatic fraud alerts. I called my investment broker next, then my insurance agent. Same story everywhere: unauthorized online access, gradual theft, systematic exploitation. By the time I'd finished making calls, I discovered they'd stolen over $30,000 from various accounts. The phone rang just as I was updating my journal with these new discoveries. Unknown number, but I answered anyway. Mrs. Patterson, this is Detective Sarah Chen with the Millfield Police Department. I understand you've been in contact with several financial institutions today regarding potential fraud. My heart stopped. Yes, but how did you... Your bank contacted us, ma'am. When someone reports this level of financial exploitation, especially involving an elderly victim, we're automatically notified. I'd like to come by and speak with you about what's been happening. 30 minutes later, Detective Chen sat in my living room taking detailed notes as I explained the situation. She was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 30s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner that reminded me of myself at that age. Mrs. Patterson, she said after I'd finished my account, you've been the victim of what we call long-term financial exploitation by family members. It's more common than people realize, and it's often very difficult to prosecute because the victims are reluctant to press charges against their own relatives. I want to press charges, I said without hesitation, even against your own son, especially against my own son. He knows better, I raised him better, and if I don't stop him now, he'll do this to someone else. Detective Chen studied me carefully. You understand that once we start an investigation, there's no going back. Your son and daughter-in-law will be arrested, charged, possibly imprisoned. Your family will be destroyed. My family was destroyed the moment David decided to steal from me. My voice was steady, but inside I was screaming. Detective, I spent 40 years teaching high school students about right and wrong, about consequences, about taking responsibility for their actions. My son apparently didn't learn those lessons. Maybe prison will teach him what I failed to. And we spent another hour going over evidence, the forged deed, the missing items, the unauthorized bank transactions, my journal entries proving my mental competency. Detective Chen photographed everything, bagged the fake prescription bottle as evidence, and took a formal statement. Mrs. Patterson, I need to warn you about something. If your son is as desperate as you believe, and if he's facing federal charges for securities fraud, he might escalate his behavior when he realizes you're fighting back. Has he ever been violent? I thought about the question seriously. David had always been ambitious, sometimes ruthless in business, but violent. No, never. He's manipulative, calculating, but not physically aggressive. What about his wife? Veronica is... I paused, trying to find the right words. She's the type who would smile while she stabbed you in the back. Cold, methodical, but I can't imagine her resorting to physical violence either. Nevertheless, I want you to be careful. Don't confront them directly. Don't let them know you're onto their scheme. And if you feel threatened in any way, call 911 immediately. After Detective Chen left, I sat in the growing dusk of my living room, surrounded by the ghosts of stolen memories. The empty spaces where family photographs had hung the cheap furniture that had replaced Robert's handcrafted pieces, the silence where laughter used to ring, all of it testament to my son's betrayal. But alongside the grief, something else was growing stronger: purpose. For the first time since Robert's death, I had a mission that mattered. I was going to stop David and Veronica, not just for myself, but for every other elderly person they might target in the future. The phone rang again. This time it was Ethan. Grandma Eleanor, how are you? I've been meaning to call, but freshman year is crazy busy. Are you doing okay? His voice was so young, so innocent, so full of love for me that I nearly broke down crying. Instead, I forced myself to sound normal. I'm fine, sweetheart. How are your classes going? Great. I'm taking calculus, physics, computer science, and an engineering design course. It's challenging, but I love it. Grandpa Robert would have been so proud. He would have been very proud. I agreed, my throat tight with emotion. Ethan, I was wondering, do you have plans for this weekend? I'd love to see you. Actually, yes, Mom and Dad invited me home for dinner Sunday night. They said they had some big news to share. You should come too. It's been forever since we all had dinner together. My blood chilled. Sunday dinner, the day after they expected to have me safely locked away in Sunset Manor, probably sedated and compliant. What kind of big news were they planning to share with Ethan? That his grandmother had been committed to a care facility, that she was suffering from dementia and wouldn't be part of his life anymore. That sounds wonderful. I lied smoothly. What time? 6 o'clock. Oh, and Grandma Mom said something about you moving to a new place, some kind of assisted living community. She made it sound really nice with activities and new friends and everything. So they were already preparing Ethan for my disappearance, spinning it as a positive choice, a fun new adventure for dear old Grandma. By the time he learned the truth, it would be too late to help me. We'll talk about it Sunday, I said carefully. Ethan, I love you very much. You know that, don't you? Of course I know that, Grandma. You're the best. I love you too. After we hung up, I sat in the darkness for a long time planning. Sunday was 4 days away. I had until then to gather enough evidence to destroy David and Veronica's plans completely, but more importantly, I had to figure out how to tell Ethan the truth without destroying him in the process. Friday morning arrived with an autumn chill that matched my mood. According to David's timeline, this was the day I was supposed to meekly pack my belongings and allow myself to be carted off to Sunset Manor like an unwanted piece of furniture. Said I was waiting in my kitchen when Richard arrived at 8 o'clock, accompanied by a stern-looking woman in an expensive suit. Eleanor, this is Judge Martha Winters, Richard said. She's agreed to help us with a little theater today. Judge Winters smiled, and I suddenly recognized her. Martha Coleman from college. I haven't seen you in 20 years. Eleanor Patterson, you look exactly the same. She embraced me warmly. When Richard told me what was happening to you, I was furious. No one deserves to be treated this way, especially not by their own family. It turned out Martha had followed the case closely after Richard contacted her. As a family court judge, she'd seen too many cases of elder abuse, and she was more than willing to help catch David and Veronica in the act. The plan is simple, Richard explained. We wait for them to arrive with the movers. We let them think they've won. Then Martha and I make our appearance and we spring the trap. At 10 o'clock sharp, a moving truck pulled up outside my house, followed by David's silver Mercedes. I watched from the kitchen window as my son emerged from his car, straightening his expensive tie with the confidence of a man who believed he'd already won. Veronica stepped out of the passenger side, consulting her phone with the efficiency of a general coordinating a military operation. They knocked on the door of the house where David had lived for 10 years, as if he were a stranger asking for admission. "Hello, Mom," David said when I opened the door. His smile was perfectly calibrated, sympathetic, but firm, the expression of a man doing something difficult but necessary. "Are you ready to go?" "I suppose I have to be," I replied, playing my part perfectly. Behind me, Richard and Martha were hidden in the study, waiting for their cue. Veronica swept past me into the living room, surveying the space like a conquering general. "The movers will pack your personal belongings, Eleanor. We've arranged for storage of anything you can't fit in your new room. Don't worry about the heavy work, everything's been handled." "How thoughtful of you," I said dryly. The movers, two large men who looked more like thugs than professional furniture handlers, began carrying boxes out of the house. I noticed they weren't being particularly careful with my belongings. A lamp that had belonged to my mother crashed to the floor, its ceramic base shattering. One of them shrugged apologetically but kept working. Careful with that, I protested as they manhandled Robert's antique desk. Mom, these are just things, David said dismissively. What matters is that you'll be safe and cared for at Sunset Manor. Just things. I stared at him in disbelief. That desk was your father's. He built it with his own hands. You used to do your homework at that desk. I remember, Beau, David said, but his voice held no emotion. And now it will be in storage, preserved for future generations. Future generations. As if he planned to pass it down to children he'd never had, rather than simply selling it for whatever he could get. Veronica appeared at my elbow with a clipboard and pen. Eleanor, I just need you to sign a few more documents. Authorization for the move, transfer of utilities, that sort of thing. I glanced at the papers. More forgeries, more legal-sounding language designed to strip away what remained of my rights. What if I refused to sign Mom? David's voice took on a harder edge. We've been through this. You don't really have a choice here. Actually, said a voice from the hallway, she has quite a few choices. David spun around as Richard emerged from the study, followed by Judge Winters in her black robes. The color drained from my son's face so quickly I thought he might faint. Richard, what are you doing here? Protecting my client from fraud, forgery, and theft, Richard replied calmly. David, I think you know Judge Winters from the county courthouse. Your Honor, David stammered, clearly struggling to process what was happening. We weren't expecting. I'm sure you weren't, Martha said dryly. Criminals rarely expect to be caught in the act. Veronica had gone pale but maintained her composure better than her husband. I'm sorry, but I don't understand what's happening here. We're simply helping Eleanor move to a care facility. She's been having memory problems. Has she? Richard pulled out a thick folder. Because according to Dr. Martinez's actual medical records, Mrs. Patterson is in excellent mental and physical health. No memory problems, no cognitive decline, no need for assisted living. That's impossible, David said weakly. She's been confused, forgetful. The only confusion here, Martha interjected, is your apparent confusion about the legal consequences of elder abuse, fraud, and forgery. I stepped forward, finally dropping my act of helpless confusion. David, you really should have checked where I was on March 15th when I supposedly signed over my house deed. What do you mean? I was substitute teaching at Lincoln High School all day. I have documentation. Time cards, pay stubs, witnesses. There's no way I could have been in Richard's office signing documents that day. David's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Beside him, Veronica's carefully constructed mask was finally cracking. Furthermore, Richard continued, the deed you've been waving around is a forgery. Poor quality work, really. Wrong paper, wrong notary seal, wrong signature. Did you really think you could fool a lawyer with 25 years of experience? This is ridiculous, Veronica said, finally finding her voice. Eleanor is clearly having one of her lucid moments, but anyone who's spent time with her recently knows she's declining rapidly. Are you referring to the same Eleanor Patterson who's been keeping a detailed daily journal for the past 3 years? Martha pulled out my journal, opening it to recent entries. This is the handwriting and thought process of someone in cognitive decline. These detailed, coherent, chronologically accurate entries. I watched David read over the judge's shoulder, seeing his face grow paler as he realized the depth of his miscalculation. Every lie he'd told, every manipulation, every theft, I documented it all in clear, precise detail. Now then, Richard said, settling into his lawyer persona, let's discuss the criminal charges: forgery of legal documents, identity theft, unauthorized access to financial accounts, theft of personal property, elder abuse. I count at least 7 felonies, and that's just what we've discovered so far. You can't prove any of this, Veronica said, but her voice lacked conviction. Can't we? Martha smiled grimly. We have the forged documents. We have bank records showing unauthorized online access from this address. We have detailed documentation of stolen property. We have witness testimony from multiple financial institutions. And we have Mrs. Patterson's journal, which provides a clear, competent account of your systematic campaign of theft and manipulation. The moving men had stopped working, standing awkwardly in the doorway with boxes in their hands, clearly wondering what they'd gotten themselves into. You can put those down and leave, I told them firmly. Your services won't be needed today. David finally found his voice. Mom, this is all a misunderstanding. We were trying to help you. The memory issues, the confusion. We were worried about you. Were you worried about me when you stole $15,000 from my bank accounts? Were you helping me when you replaced my grandmother's china with cheap imitations? Were you protecting me when you erased every trace of your father from this house? Dad's things, we were preserving them. By selling them, I pulled out a printed page from my morning's research, like this antique pocket watch, currently listed on eBay under Veronica's username, or these family photographs being sold on Facebook Marketplace. Veronica's composure finally shattered completely. You don't understand the pressure we've been under. David's business, the SEC investigation, the clients threatening to sue. We needed money. So you decided to steal from me, I said quietly. The woman who raised your husband, who welcomed you into this family, who trusted you with her home and her heart. Eleanor, please, David said, tears streaming down his face. I never meant for it to go this far. It started small, just a few thousand to cover some business expenses until things turned around. But then the problems got bigger and the clients got more aggressive and we needed more money. And it was easier to steal from your mother than to face the consequences of your own choices, Martha observed. What happens now? I asked, looking at Richard and Martha. That depends, Richard replied. The evidence is overwhelming. The police are ready to make arrests, but Eleanor, you're the victim here. How you want to proceed is ultimately up to you. I looked at David, really looked at him, trying to find traces of the little boy I'd raised. He was sobbing openly now, all pretense of control gone, looking more like a frightened child than the sophisticated businessman he pretended to be. I need to know everything, I said finally. Every theft, every lie, every crime. I need to understand exactly what you've done and why and how we got to this point, and then I'll decide what kind of justice you deserve. The afternoon stretched ahead of us, filled with confessions and revelations that would reshape everything I thought I knew about my own family. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like myself again, strong, determined, and completely in control of my own destiny. The real reckoning was just beginning. David collapsed into Robert's favorite armchair, the real one I'd hidden in the basement when they'd replaced it with their cheap imitation and buried his face in his hands. The sound of his sobbing filled the living room, but I felt no sympathy. 40 years of teaching had taught me to distinguish between genuine remorse and self-pity, and what I was witnessing was purely the latter. Start talking, I said, settling onto the couch across from him. Richard positioned himself near the window, his legal pad ready. Martha took the chair by the fireplace, her judge's robes lending an air of official gravity to the proceedings. I want to know everything, David. When did this start? How long have you been planning to steal my life? Veronica stood behind her husband's chair like a sentinel, her manicured hands gripping the fabric. Eleanor, you have to understand, I wasn't talking to you, I cut her off sharply. David can speak for himself. Or has his wife been making all his decisions for him? My son looked up, his face red and blotchy from crying. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, Mom, none of it. But it did happen like this. So explain to me how we got here. David wiped his nose with his sleeve, a gesture so reminiscent of his childhood that it nearly broke my resolve. Nearly. The business started having problems about 2 years ago. Small ones at first. A few investments didn't perform as well as expected. Some clients became concerned about their returns. So you started stealing from them, Martha interjected. Not stealing, borrowing. I was moving money between accounts to cover temporary shortfalls while I waited for other investments to mature. It's called kiting, and it's not unusual in the investment world when you're running a Ponzi scheme, Richard finished coldly. Don't dress it up in financial jargon, David. You were stealing from new clients to pay old clients and hoping you could make enough legitimate profits to cover the difference. David's shoulders sagged. It wasn't supposed to be permanent. I had some promising opportunities: tech startups, real estate developments, cryptocurrency ventures. If just one of them had paid off. But they didn't, I said. They never do they? That's why they call it gambling, not investing. The cryptocurrency thing was supposed to be a sure bet, Veronica said, suddenly her voice tight with frustration. David's partner assured us it couldn't fail. We put in everything we had plus money from 6 of his biggest clients. How much money, Martha asked. David's voice was barely a whisper. $2.8 million. The number hung in the air like a physical presence. I felt Richard shift uncomfortably beside me, and Martha made a note on her pad. $2.8 million of other people's money gambled away on cryptocurrency dreams. And when that failed, I continued, my voice surprisingly steady. You decided to steal from me. Not steal, David insisted weakly. We hoped we could use your assets as collateral for a loan just temporarily until we could figure out another solution. By forging documents and lying to me about my mental capacity. That was Veronica's idea, David said, and his wife shot him a look that could have melted steel. Don't you dare, she hissed. Don't you dare try to pin this all on me. But it was your idea, David protested. You're the one who said we needed to make Mom seem incompetent so no one would believe her if she tried to fight the deed transfer. And you're the one who said your mother was just a silly old woman who'd never figure out what we were doing. I watched this exchange with fascination and growing horror. They were turning on each other already, each desperate to minimize their own culpability. But their words were revealing far more than they realized. So, you've been planning this for how long? I asked. Veronica's mouth snapped shut, but David was too distraught to be careful. About a year, maybe longer. Veronica started noticing things about your routine, your habits when you went to the bank, how you managed your money. I was being helpful, Veronica protested. I was trying to understand Eleanor's needs so we could better assist her as she aged. By stealing from her, Richard's voice dripped with disgust. By preparing for eventualities, do you have any idea how expensive elder care is? We were thinking ahead, making sure there would be resources available when Eleanor needed them. Resources that you were planning to control, Martha observed. Someone had to think practically about the future. I stood up and began pacing, my mind racing as the full scope of their betrayal became clear. The memory issues you kept mentioning, the confusion, the forgetfulness. You were gaslighting me, weren't you? Deliberately trying to make me question my own mental capacity. David nodded miserably. Veronica read articles about how to do it. Moving things around the house, switching medications, telling you things that never happened and insisting they did. The prescription bottle, I said suddenly, that blood pressure medication I never filled. I got it filled using your insurance, Veronica admitted. I needed physical evidence of your supposed memory problems, pills you'd forgotten to take, doctor's appointments you'd forgotten about. You've been poisoning me. The words came out as a roar. No, God, no, nothing like that. The pills were just props to make it look like you were forgetting to take your medication. But you were hoping I'd actually take them, weren't you? Blood pressure medication can be dangerous if you don't actually have high blood pressure. Veronica's silence was answer enough. Richard was scribbling furiously on his legal pad. This is premeditated elder abuse, systematic psychological manipulation designed to facilitate financial exploitation. Judge Winters, we're looking at multiple felony charges here. Indeed we are, Martha replied grimly, and this is just what they've admitted to so far. I turned my attention back to David. The house deed wasn't the end game, was it? What else were you planning to steal? Mom, I want you to know that none of this was personal. We weren't trying to hurt you. We were just. Answer the question, David. He exchanged a look with Veronica, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. We had prepared additional documents. Richard took the folder and began examining its contents. His face grew darker with each page he turned. Powers of attorney, healthcare directives, investment account transfers, insurance beneficiary changes. He looked up at me. Eleanor, they were planning to take everything. Complete control over your finances, your healthcare decisions, your living situation, everything. The plan was to have you declared incompetent, Veronica explained with clinical detachment. We had arranged for a psychiatric evaluation with a doctor who specializes in dementia assessments, someone who would document your cognitive decline and recommend immediate placement in a secure facility. A doctor you had bribed, Martha said. It wasn't a question. Compensated for his expertise, Veronica corrected. Dr. Kellerman is very experienced in these matters. He understands the importance of protecting elderly individuals from themselves. I felt physically sick. The scope of their conspiracy was breathtaking in its thoroughness and cruelty. They hadn't just planned to steal my money, they had planned to steal my freedom, my dignity, my very identity. What about Ethan? I asked quietly. What were you planning to tell him? David's face crumpled again. We were going to explain that you had developed dementia, that you needed professional care we couldn't provide at home. We hoped he'd understand that we were doing what was best for you. And when he wanted to visit me, the facility we chose has very strict visiting policies, Veronica said. For the patient's own good, of course. Familiar visitors can sometimes agitate dementia patients, make their condition worse. So you were planning to isolate me completely, cut me off from my grandson, my friends, anyone who might question your version of events. It would have been temporary, David insisted. Just until we could get the business back on track, pay back the client, straighten everything out. And then what? You'd have miraculously cured my dementia. We would have found a way to transition you back to independent living. Maybe a nice retirement community somewhere you could be happy and safe. I stared at my son in amazement. Even now, faced with the complete exposure of his crimes, he was still lying to himself about his motivations. He actually seemed to believe that he could have somehow made this right, that his theft and betrayal were temporary measures that would ultimately benefit everyone. David, I said gently, do you understand what you've done? Do you comprehend the magnitude of your betrayal? I was trying to save my business, my reputation, everything Dad and I worked for. Your father never worked for your business. Your father was a carpenter and a craftsman who built things with his own hands and took pride in honest work. He would be appalled by what you've become. The words hit David like physical blows. He doubled over in his chair, sobbing with renewed intensity. I know he would hate what I've done. I hate what I've done. But I didn't know how to stop it. The lies just kept getting bigger, the debts kept growing, and I couldn't see any way out that didn't end with me losing everything. So you decided I should lose everything instead. You have more than enough money. You live in this big house all by yourself. You have hundreds of thousands of dollars just sitting in bank accounts. You don't need all of this. That money isn't just sitting there, David. It's my security, my insurance against illness, against emergencies, against exactly the kind of predators you and your wife have become. And this house isn't just a building, it's my home. It's filled with memories of my life with your father, with you as a child, with 40 years of love and laughter and ordinary moments that meant everything to me. I walked to the mantelpiece where a few family photographs still remained, the ones they hadn't yet replaced or stolen. I picked up a picture of David at age 10, grinning as he showed off a wooden birdhouse he'd built with Robert's help. This little boy, I said, holding up the photograph, would be ashamed of the man you've become. David looked at the picture and his sobbing intensified. I know. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. Sorry for getting caught, or sorry for what you did. He couldn't answer which was answer enough. Veronica, who had remained silent during this exchange, suddenly stepped forward. Eleanor, I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but you need to think about the bigger picture here. If you press charges, if you destroy David's life, what does that accomplish? He'll go to prison, his business will be ruined, and you'll still have lost your family. Wouldn't it be better to find a solution that works for everyone? I turned to face her fully, this woman who had smiled at my dinner table while plotting to steal my life. What kind of solution did you have in mind? David could sign the house back over to you. We could return whatever money we've borrowed. David could close his business, take a regular job, pay back his clients over time. No one needs to go to prison. No one needs to have their life destroyed. Except that David has already destroyed his life, Martha interjected, and yours. And he came very close to destroying Eleanor's life as well. Actions have consequences, Mrs. Patterson. That's how the justice system works. The justice system is supposed to seek the best outcome for everyone involved, Veronica shot back. What's the best outcome here? An elderly woman left completely alone because her son is in federal prison. A young man's future ruined because his father made some poor business decisions. What about the clients whose money you stole? Richard asked. What about their futures? Some of those people lost their entire retirement savings because of David's poor business decisions. David looked up sharply. How do you know about my clients? Because I've been investigating you for the past 3 days, Richard replied. Mrs. Margaret Chen, 82 years old, trusted you with the $340,000 she got from selling her late husband's business. That money was supposed to fund her medical care for the rest of her life. Where's it now, David? It's tied up in investments. She'll get it back when what? When your cryptocurrency magically rebounds, when your tech startup finally turns a profit, when you win the lottery. I can make it right. I can get their money back with what? You're broke, David. Your business accounts are empty. Your personal assets are mortgaged to the hilt and your credit is destroyed. The only thing standing between you and complete financial ruin is your mother's house and savings account. The silence that followed this pronouncement was deafening. David stared at Richard as if he'd just been sentenced to death, while Veronica's face cycled through a range of emotions: shock, fear, calculation, and finally rage. This is all your fault, she hissed at her husband. I told you we needed to move faster. I told you we should have had Eleanor committed months ago before she could figure out what was happening. You told me she was too old and confused to be a threat. I told you she was smarter than you gave her credit for, but you were so arrogant, so convinced that your pathetic charm would be enough to fool her. I watched this marital meltdown with grim fascination. Their partnership built on greed and deception was dissolving before my eyes as each blamed the other for their failure. Actually, I said, interrupting their argument, there's something else you should know, something that makes your entire plan not just criminal but pointless. They both turned to stare at me. The money you've been trying to steal, most of it isn't there anymore. David's face went white. What do you mean? I mean that 6 months ago when I first started noticing things disappearing from my house, when Veronica's questions about my finances became too pointed, when you started showing up with brochures for retirement communities, I moved the bulk of my assets into a trust. That's impossible, Veronica whispered. $750,000 to be exact, safely tucked away in an irrevocable trust that matures when I turn 70. Richard is the trustee and Ethan is the beneficiary if anything happens to me. You've been plotting to steal money that's already beyond your reach. The color drained from David's face so completely I thought he might faint. But the bank accounts, the investment statements, show about $50,000 in total. Enough to live on comfortably, not enough to solve your financial problems. You've been chasing fool's gold, David. Veronica sank into the nearest chair as if her legs could no longer support her. The trust. When did you set it up? The same week you offered to help me with online banking. Funny how that worked out. Richard smiled grimly. Eleanor has always been an excellent judge of character. She spotted you two for what you were long before you realized she was onto you. But if the money's in a trust, David said desperately, maybe we could find a way to access it. If Mom is declared incompetent, if Richard is removed as trustee, not going to happen, Martha said firmly. The trust is ironclad and Mrs. Patterson is clearly competent. You've wasted a year of your life chasing something you could never have obtained. I sat back down, suddenly feeling very tired. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the confrontation was beginning to fade, replaced by a profound sadness. Do you understand now, David? Do you see how pointless this all was? You destroyed our relationship, betrayed my trust, committed multiple felonies, and traumatized an innocent old woman, all for nothing. The money you needed was never there to begin with. David was staring at his hands, tears dripping steadily onto his expensive suit. What am I going to do? The SEC investigation, the client lawsuits, the criminal charges. I'm going to lose everything. You lost everything the moment you decided to steal from your own mother, I replied. The question now is whether you're going to take responsibility for your choices or continue trying to blame everyone else for the consequences. Eleanor, Veronica said, her voice now stripped of its earlier confidence. Surely we can work something out, some kind of arrangement that doesn't destroy everyone's lives. My life was nearly destroyed by your arrangement, I pointed out. You were going to have me declared insane and locked away in a facility where I'd never see my grandson again. You were going to steal my home, my money, my freedom, my dignity. What arrangement do you think would be fair compensation for that? She had no answer. The room fell silent except for David's quiet sobbing and the ticking of Robert's grandfather clock in the corner. I looked around at the space that had nearly been stolen from me, the walls that held decades of memories, the furniture that Robert had built with love and care, the garden visible through the windows where we'd planned to spend our retirement years together. There's one more thing, I said finally. Something I need to know before we decide what happens next. David looked up hopefully, as if I might be about to offer him some kind of lifeline. Ethan, does he know anything about this? No, David said immediately. Nothing. We've kept him completely out of it. He thinks his father is a successful businessman, and his grandmother is a dotty old lady who needs to be put in a home. We may have implied that you were having some difficulties. We wanted to prepare him in case your plan worked and I disappeared from his life forever. David nodded miserably. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where Ethan had played as a child, where he'd helped me plant tomatoes and learn the names of flowers. He was 18 now, a young man starting his own life, and he had no idea that his father was a criminal and his grandmother was fighting for her survival. Sunday dinner, I said quietly. You invited Ethan for Sunday dinner to share your big news. What were you planning to tell him? That you had been moved to Sunset Manor for your own safety, Veronica admitted. That you were comfortable and well cared for, but that visits would be limited because of your condition. And he would have believed you because he trusts his parents to tell him the truth. Eleanor, David said, his voice breaking, please don't tell him, not yet. Let me figure out how to explain this to him. He's just starting college. He's got his whole life ahead of him. This will destroy him. I turned back to face my son, this man who had plotted to steal my life and was now begging me to protect his relationship with his own child. The irony was not lost on me. David's, I said gently, Ethan is going to learn the truth eventually. The SEC investigation, the criminal charges, the bankruptcy, it's all going to become public record. He's going to find out that his father is a thief who stole from elderly clients and his own mother. The question is whether he hears it from us with context and explanation, or whether he reads about it in the newspaper. He'll hate me. He might. Or he might understand that people make mistakes, that good people can do terrible things when they're desperate, and that redemption is possible if someone is willing to face the consequences of their actions and work to make things right. David looked at me with something like hope in his eyes. Are you saying, are you willing to give me a chance to make this right? I looked at Richard and Martha, both of whom were watching me carefully, waiting to see what kind of justice I would choose. Then I looked back at my son, this broken man who had once been the little boy in the photograph. I'm saying that what happens next is up to you, David. You can continue lying, continue trying to escape responsibility, continue blaming everyone else for the consequences of your choices, or you can start telling the truth, all of it, and accept whatever punishment you've earned. And if I choose to tell the truth, then maybe someday you'll be worthy of your son's love again, and maybe, just maybe, you'll remember who you used to be before greed and desperation turned you into someone your father wouldn't recognize. The afternoon was growing late, and there were still so many decisions to be made, so many consequences to be faced. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like we might be moving towards something resembling justice. The real test would come on Sunday when Ethan arrived for dinner expecting to hear good news and instead learned that his family had been built on lies. How we handled that conversation would determine not just David's fate, but the future of all our relationships. The hardest part was still ahead. Saturday morning arrived with a stillness that felt ominous, like the calm before a devastating storm. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where David had delivered his ultimatum just 3 days earlier, and watched the sunrise paint Robert's garden in shades of gold and amber. In 12 hours, Ethan would walk through my front door expecting a pleasant family dinner, unaware that his entire world was about to collapse. The phone had been ringing constantly since yesterday's confrontation, Richard calling with updates on the legal proceedings, Detective Chen requesting additional documentation, Martha checking to ensure I felt safe in my own home. But the call I'd been dreading finally came at 8:30, just as I was finishing my second cup of coffee. Grandma Eleanor, Ethan's voice was bright with anticipation. I'm so excited about dinner tonight. Dad sounded really mysterious about this big news they have to share. Are you sure you don't know what it's about? My heart clenched as I listened to his innocent enthusiasm. I have some idea, I said carefully. Ethan, sweetheart, there are some things we need to discuss before tonight's dinner, some difficult things. Difficult how? Is everything okay? Are you sick? I'm fine, honey, but your parents... Ethan, I need you to come here early, before dinner. Can you be here by 3 o'clock? There was a pause. Grandma, you're scaring me. What's going on? I'll explain everything when you get here. Just be prepared for some surprises, okay? And Ethan, I love you very much. Whatever you learn today, please remember that. After we hung up, I sat in the silence of my kitchen and tried to figure out how to tell an 18-year-old boy that his father was a criminal. How do you shatter someone's hero worship gently? How do you preserve a young man's faith in humanity while revealing that the people he trusted most had been living lies? At 10 o'clock, Richard arrived with a briefcase full of documents and a grim expression. Eleanor, I've been up most of the night going through David's financial records. What we discovered yesterday was just the tip of the iceberg. We spread the papers across my dining room table like surgeons preparing for a complex operation. Bank statements, investment records, client files, SEC complaints, the documentary evidence of my son's descent into criminality. The Ponzi scheme goes back almost 3 years, Richard explained, pointing to a series of transactions. It started small, maybe moving money between accounts to cover temporary shortfalls. But look at this pattern. He traced a line of increasingly large transfers. Each quarter, the amounts get bigger. The lies get more elaborate. The fake investment reports become more creative. I studied the documents, my teacher's eye quickly grasping the progression. He was like a gambling addict, wasn't he? Each loss requiring a bigger bet to win back what he'd already lost. Exactly. And look at this. Richard pulled out a folder marked Client Communications. These are emails David sent to his investors over the past 2 years, each one more desperate than the last, but disguised as confidence. I read one of the emails dated 6 months ago. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, I'm pleased to report that your portfolio has returned 18% this quarter, significantly outperforming the market. The cryptocurrency investments I recommended have been particularly profitable. I'm confident we can achieve even better results in the coming months. Please don't hesitate to refer friends and family members who might benefit from these exceptional opportunities. The Johnsons lost everything, didn't they? I asked. Every penny. 40 years of savings gone. They're in their 70s, Eleanor. They'll never recover from this. The weight of my son's crimes was staggering. It wasn't just about me, wasn't just about our family's betrayal. David had destroyed the lives of innocent people, elderly couples who had trusted him with their futures. How many victims are there total? 17 confirmed so far, maybe more. The SEC is still investigating. Richard pulled out another document. Total losses appear to be somewhere around $4.2 million. I felt physically sick. And he thought my $800,000 would somehow fix this. Desperate people don't think rationally. David probably believed he could use your money to buy time, maybe make one last bet that would turn everything around. Or maybe he and Veronica were planning to disappear, I said quietly. Maybe the plan wasn't to fix anything, but to steal what they could and run. Richard's expression darkened. That's exactly what they were planning. He pulled out a manila envelope I hadn't seen before. Detective Chen found this in David's office yesterday evening when they executed the search warrant. The envelope contained travel documents, passport applications for David, Veronica, and Ethan, flight reservations to Costa Rica for the following week, real estate listings for properties in San Jose, bank routing numbers for offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. They were going to take Ethan. The words came out as a whisper. According to these documents, they were planning to tell him it was a family vacation, a celebration of some big business success. By the time he realized they weren't coming back, it would have been too late. I stared at my grandson's passport photo, his young face smiling trustingly at the camera, unaware that his parents were planning to make him an accessory to their crimes. He would have become a fugitive without even knowing it. International kidnapping in the eyes of the law. Ethan is 18, but if he was deceived about the nature of the trip, he would have lost everything. His education, his future, his whole life in America. I felt a surge of rage unlike anything I'd ever experienced. They were willing to destroy their own son's future to save themselves. Richard nodded grimly. There's more. Look at this. He showed me a document that made my blood freeze. An enrollment application for Ethan at a private university in Costa Rica, dated for the spring semester. David and Veronica hadn't been planning a temporary escape. They'd been preparing to permanently relocate their son to a foreign country, cutting him off from everything he'd ever known. Would this have worked? I asked. Could they have just taken him and disappeared? For a while, maybe. But Costa Rica has an extradition treaty with the United States. Eventually, the law would have caught up with them, and Ethan would have been trapped in the middle of it all. I walked to the window looking out at the garden where Ethan had learned to ride his bicycle, where he'd built snow forts in winter and caught fireflies in summer. All those memories, all those roots would have been severed if David's plan had succeeded. Richard, I need to know something. If I hadn't figured out what they were doing, if their plan had worked perfectly, what would have happened to me? He was quiet for a long moment. Based on these documents, you would have been declared incompetent and committed to a secure psychiatric facility. Your assets would have been liquidated to pay for your care with David as your legal guardian controlling all financial decisions. And when the money ran out, you would have become a ward of the state. Medicaid would have covered basic care in whatever facility would accept you. I closed my eyes, imagining that alternative reality, locked away in some sterile institution labeled as mentally ill with no visitors, no contact with the outside world, slowly dying among strangers, while my son lived lavishly on my stolen money. How long do you think I would have survived in a place like that? Eleanor, don't torture yourself with How long, Richard? Studies show that elderly people who are inappropriately institutionalized, especially those separated from family support systems, typically 18 months, maybe 2 years. David hadn't just been planning to steal my money, he'd been planning to kill me slowly and legally. At 2:30, I heard a car in the driveway. Through the window, I saw Ethan climbing out of his beat-up Honda Civic, the car he'd bought with money earned from his summer job at the hardware store. He looked so young, so trusting, so completely unaware of what was waiting for him inside the house. I opened the door before he could knock. "Hello, sweetheart." "Grandma." He wrapped me in one of his signature bear hugs, lifting me slightly off the ground. "You look great. I was worried when you sounded so serious on the phone. Come in, honey. We need to talk." Richard was waiting in the living room, his briefcase packed and ready to go. We'd agreed that Ethan should hear the basic facts from me first before getting overwhelmed with legal details. "Mr. Harmon," Ethan shook Richard's hand warmly. "I haven't seen you since Grandpa's funeral. How are you doing?" "I'm well, Ethan, though I wish we were meeting under better circumstances." Ethan looked between us, his expression growing concerned. "Okay, now I'm really worried. What's going on?" I led him to the couch where we'd sat together countless times over the years, reading stories when he was little, helping him with homework when he was older, talking about his dreams and plans for the future. Today I had to destroy everything he thought he knew about his family. "Ethan, I need to tell you some things about your parents, some very difficult things. And I need you to listen to everything before you ask questions, okay?" His face went pale. "Are they getting divorced?" "No, honey, it's more serious than that." I took his hands in mine, feeling how young and smooth they were compared to my weathered fingers. "Your father's business is in trouble, very serious trouble. He's been stealing money from his clients, and he's been stealing from me." "What? That's impossible. Dad's business is doing great. He just bought Mom a new car, and they've been talking about renovating the kitchen." "They bought those things with stolen money, Ethan. Money that belonged to other people, elderly people who trusted your father with their life savings." I watched the confusion and denial play across his face. "Grandma, I think there's been some mistake. Dad wouldn't steal from anyone. He's always taught me about honesty and integrity and Ethan." My voice was gentle but firm. "Your father forged documents to try to steal my house. He's been taking money from my bank accounts without permission. He hired fake movers to throw me out of my own home so he could sell it and use the proceeds to cover his business debts." "No." Ethan pulled his hands away from mine. "No, that's not true. There's been some kind of misunderstanding." Richard leaned forward. "Ethan, I know this is hard to hear, but we have documentation. Bank records, forged deeds, SEC complaints from 17 different clients. Your father is facing multiple federal charges." "You're lying." Ethan stood up, his voice rising. "Why are you lying about my father?" I pulled out the folder of evidence photographs of the forged deed bank statements showing unauthorized transfers printouts of the fake eBay listings where our family heirlooms were being sold. "Look at this, honey. Look at the evidence." Ethan grabbed the papers, his hands shaking as he read through them. I watched his face change as the reality sank in confusion, giving way to shock, shock giving way to horror. "This signature," he said, pointing to the forged deed. "This isn't how you sign your name anymore. Your arthritis changed your handwriting years ago." "That's right. Someone forged my signature using an old example. And these bank transactions, Dad set up your online banking last Christmas. He said he was helping you manage your finances. He was stealing from me, Ethan, gradually, carefully hoping I wouldn't notice small amounts disappearing." Ethan sank back onto the couch, the papers scattered around him. "The SEC complaints. Mrs. Chen, the Johnsons, the Rodriguezes. I know these people. They're family friends. Mrs. Chen used to babysit me when I was little. Your father stole their retirement money, Ethan. Mrs. Chen lost $340,000. She's 82 years old and can't afford her medication anymore. Oh, God. Ethan buried his face in his hands. Oh, God, what has he done? There's more, I said gently. Something that affects you directly. I showed him the travel documents, the Costa Rica real estate listings, the university enrollment forms. I watched his face cycle through disbelief, anger, and finally a kind of hollow understanding. They were going to kidnap me, he said quietly. They were going to make me a fugitive without telling me. I think they convinced themselves it was for your own good, that they were protecting you from the consequences of their crimes. By destroying my entire life, by making me an international criminal. Ethan's voice was getting louder, angrier. I'm supposed to start spring semester next month. I have internship applications, graduate school plans, a girlfriend. They were gonna take all of that away. Your parents are desperate people, Ethan. Desperate people make terrible decisions. Don't. His voice was sharp now, the first real anger I'd ever heard from him. Don't make excuses for them. Don't tell me they were trying to protect me when they were planning to ruin my life. Richard cleared his throat. Ethan, there is something else you need to know. Your parents are supposed to be hosting dinner tonight. They think you're coming over to hear some good news. What good news? They were planning to tell you that your grandmother had been moved to an assisted living facility for her own safety, that she was comfortable and well cared for, but that visits would be limited because of her supposed dementia. Ethan stared at me in horror. They were going to make you disappear from my life. They were going to make me think you were sick. If their plan had worked, you never would have seen me again. I would have been locked away in a psychiatric facility, declared mentally incompetent with no way to contact you or tell you the truth. And you would have died there, wouldn't you? His voice was very quiet now. Old people don't survive in places like that when they're not actually sick. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Ethan stood up and began pacing around the living room just as I had done 3 days earlier when my world fell apart. How long have you known about this? I started suspecting something 6 months ago when things began disappearing from the house, but I didn't know the full extent of it until this week. And you didn't tell me, so I wanted to protect you for as long as possible. You're just starting your adult life, Ethan. You shouldn't have to deal with this kind of betrayal from your own parents. But I do have to deal with it, don't I? Because it's real whether I know about it or not. He stopped pacing and turned to face me. Grandma, what happens now? What happens to them? Richard answered before I could. Your father is facing multiple federal charges: securities fraud, elder abuse, forgery, identity theft. He could be looking at 15 to 20 years in prison. And Mom, she's equally culpable. The evidence suggests she was the mastermind behind much of the psychological manipulation. She could face similar charges. Ethan slumped back onto the couch. My parents are going to prison. Very likely, yes. And everyone will know, all my friends, my professors, my girlfriend's family, everyone will know that my parents are criminals. Ethan, I said gently, you are not responsible for your parents' choices. Their crimes don't reflect on your character or your worth as a person. Don't they? How do I know I won't turn out like them? How do I know I won't make the same mistakes when I'm desperate? Because you're already different from them. You're sitting here learning the truth and feeling horrified by their actions. David tried to justify everything to blame everyone else. You're taking responsibility for understanding what happened. But what am I supposed to do now? How am I supposed to face them at dinner tonight? I looked at Richard, who nodded slightly. Ethan, you have choices to make. You can confront your parents directly, or you can let the legal system handle everything. You can cut contact with them completely, or you can try to maintain some kind of relationship despite what they've done. What would you do? I think I need to hear what they have to say for themselves. I think they owe me and you some honest answers about why they were willing to destroy so many lives. Ethan was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the garden where he'd played as a child. Finally, he said, "Will you come with me to dinner tonight? I don't think I can face them alone." "Of course I will." "And Mr. Harmon, will you be there too in case things get legal?" Richard nodded. "If that's what you want." What am I going to say to them? How do I even begin this conversation? You tell them the truth, I said. You tell them that you know what they've done, and you ask them to explain themselves. You give them a chance to be honest with you, maybe for the first time in years. And if they lie, if they try to manipulate me the way they manipulated you, then you'll know exactly who they really are, and you can make your decisions accordingly. We spent the next hour preparing for what promised to be the most difficult family dinner in our history. Richard coached Ethan on what questions to ask, what legal rights he had, what options were available to him going forward. I called Detective Chen to let her know about the evening's plan and to ensure that backup would be available if David and Veronica became desperate enough to try something dangerous. At 5:30, we drove together to David's house, the house he'd bought with stolen money, furnished with items pilfered from my home, decorated with family photographs that masked his criminal reality. Ethan sat in the back seat, unusually quiet, while Richard and I tried to project calm confidence. "Remember, I told Ethan as we pulled into the driveway, you don't owe them anything. Not your silence, not your forgiveness, not your complicity. You're an adult now, and you get to choose what kind of relationship, if any, you want to have with them going forward." I keep thinking about all the times Dad lectured me about honesty and integrity, all those conversations about doing the right thing even when it's difficult. Was any of that real, or was he just practicing his lies on me? "I think your father does believe in those values," I said carefully. "I think he lost his way and convinced himself that desperate circumstances justified abandoning his principles. People are capable of extraordinary self-deception when their survival is at stake. That doesn't excuse what he did." "No, it doesn't, but it might help you understand how a good man can do terrible things." David opened the door with his usual smile, warm, confident, completely fake, now that I knew what lay behind it. "Mom, Ethan, you're right on time. Veronica has prepared something special for dinner." "I'm sure she has," I replied dryly. The house looked different to me now. The expensive furniture, the artwork on the walls, the crystal glasses and fine china set out for our meal, all of it purchased with stolen money, blood money, extracted from elderly victims who had trusted David with their futures. Veronica emerged from the kitchen wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than most people make in a week. Her smile was as perfectly calibrated as her husband's, but I could see the strain around her eyes. "Eleanor, how wonderful that you decided to join us after all. I wasn't sure if you'd be feeling up to it." The subtle dig at my supposed frailty was exactly the kind of manipulation I'd come to expect from her. But tonight I wasn't playing the role of confused elderly woman. "Oh, I'm feeling quite sharp today, Veronica. Very alert, very focused." David poured wine for the adults, while Ethan sat quietly at the dining room table, studying his parents with new eyes. I wondered what he was seeing now that he knew the truth, the tells that revealed their deception, the moments when their masks slipped the subtle cruelties that I'd been too trusting to recognize. "So," David said, raising his glass in a toast, "let's celebrate some exciting news. Veronica and I have been making some big changes, some new plans for the future." "What kind of plans?" Ethan asked quietly. "Well, we've decided it's time for a family adventure. How would you like to spend next semester in Costa Rica? We found an excellent university there, very international, very progressive. It would be great for your education and a wonderful opportunity to see the world." Ethan looked at his father with an expression I'd never seen before, cold, analytical, completely without affection. "And when were you planning to mention that this family adventure was actually permanent exile?" The wineglass slipped from David's hand, shattering on the hardwood floor. The sound of David's wineglass hitting the floor echoed through the dining room like a gunshot. Red wine spread across the polished hardwood wine that had been purchased with stolen money in a house bought with the life savings of elderly victims during a dinner meant to celebrate the final destruction of our family. Veronica's perfectly composed mask cracked for just an instant before she forced her smile back into place. Ethan, sweetheart, I don't know what you mean by permanent exile. We were simply suggesting stop. Ethan's voice cut through her practiced lie like a blade. Just stop lying to me. I know everything. The SEC investigation, the stolen money, the forged deed, the plan to have Grandma declared incompetent and locked away. I know about Mrs. Chen and the Johnsons and all the other people whose lives you've destroyed. David's face went through several color changes, red to white to gray, before settling on a sickly yellow pallor. Son, I can explain everything. It's not what it seems. It's exactly what it seems, Dad. You're a thief. You stole from your clients, you stole from Grandma, and you were planning to steal my entire future by dragging me to Costa Rica as an unwitting fugitive. Veronica looked desperately between her husband and son, calculating frantically. Ethan, you have to understand the pressure we've been under, the business climate, the economy, the impossible expectations. The 17 families you stole from were dealing with the same economy, I interjected quietly. They didn't choose to become criminals. Eleanor, David's voice was pleading now, stripped of its earlier confidence. You told him. After everything we discussed, after I begged you to let me handle this, after you lied to me for over a year, systematically stole from me, and tried to have me committed to a psychiatric facility. My voice was steady, but steel ran through every word. Yes, David, I told your son the truth. Something you apparently forgot how to do. Ethan stood up from the table, his chair scraping against the floor. I want to hear it from you, both of you. I want to hear you admit what you've done. Son, please sit down. Let's discuss this rationally. No more discussions, no more excuses, no more lies. Ethan's voice carried an authority I'd never heard from him before. I'm 18 years old. I'm supposed to start my sophomore year of college next month. Instead, I'm sitting here learning that my parents are criminals who were planning to make me an international fugitive. So you're going to tell me exactly what you've done and exactly why you thought you had the right to destroy so many lives. David sank into his chair as if his legs could no longer support him. Beside him, Veronica maintained her rigid posture, but I could see the desperation creeping into her eyes. The business started having problems 3 years ago. David began, his voice barely above a whisper. Some investments didn't perform as expected. Some clients became nervous and wanted to withdraw their money. So you stole from new clients to pay the old ones, Ethan said flatly. I borrowed from new investments to cover temporary shortfalls. I thought I could turn things around, make everyone whole again. With cryptocurrency speculation and tech startups that existed only on paper, David flinched. You've seen the SEC files. I've seen everything, Dad. The fake investment reports, the non-existent companies, the offshore accounts. You weren't trying to turn anything around. You were running a Ponzi scheme. I was trying to save the business. Your grandfather and I built that company from nothing. I couldn't let it fail. Grandpa Robert built furniture and houses, I said quietly. He never built a business based on lies and theft. He taught me to work hard to provide for my family. He taught you honesty and integrity, Ethan interrupted. Values you apparently threw away the moment things got difficult. David's composure finally shattered completely. I was desperate. Do you have any idea what it's like to have 17 families depending on you for their retirement security, to have clients calling every day asking about their money, to know that you're responsible for other people's futures? So you decided to steal from them instead of admitting your failures. I thought I could fix it. I thought if I could just buy some time, find the right investment opportunity, like the cryptocurrency scheme that lost $2.8 million. David nodded miserably. That was supposed to be foolproof. My partner had connections, inside information. Your partner was a con artist, and you were the mark, Richard said, speaking for the first time since we'd entered the house. David, you weren't trying to save your client's money, you were gambling with it. And when the gambling didn't work, Ethan continued, you decided to steal from Grandma. We thought, we hoped we could use her assets temporarily just until we figured out another solution. By having me declared insane and locked away in a psychiatric facility, I added, by stealing my home, my freedom, my relationship with my grandson. It wasn't supposed to be permanent, Veronica finally exploded. We were going to take care of you, make sure you were comfortable, in a secure facility where I would have died within 2 years. I finished. Among strangers labeled as mentally ill with no visitors and no hope of ever proving my competency. We never meant for any of this to happen, David sobbed. It just spiraled out of control. Each decision led to the next one, and before you knew it, you were criminals, Ethan said with brutal clarity, and you were planning to make me a criminal too. We were trying to protect you, Veronica insisted. If we'd been arrested, if the scandal had broken, your reputation would have been destroyed. Your college applications, your future opportunities. So you decided to kidnap me instead, to make me a fugitive in a foreign country where I'd be cut off from everything I've ever known. It would have been temporary. Stop lying. Ethan slammed his hand on the table, causing the remaining glasses to jump. Just stop lying. There was nothing temporary about those Costa Rica real estate purchases or the university enrollment forms. You were planning to destroy my life permanently to save yourselves. The room fell silent except for David's quiet sobbing and the tick of the grandfather clock in the corner, Robert's clock, which had somehow survived their systematic looting of family heirlooms. I want to know about the victims, Ethan said finally. I want you to tell me about every person you stole from, their names, their ages, how much money you took, what it meant to their lives. Son, I don't think. Their name's Dad. David's voice was hollow as he began reciting the list. Margaret and William Chen, 82 and 85, $340,000, their entire retirement savings from selling Bill's hardware store. What happened to them after you stole their money? Mrs. Chen had to move in with her daughter. Bill had to go back to work part-time at Home Depot. At 85 years old. Yes. Who else? Robert and Susan Johnson, 78 and 76, $400,000, money from the sale of their family farm. What happened to them? They had to sell their house and move into a studio apartment. Susan couldn't afford her diabetes medication for 3 months. I watched my grandson's face as he processed the human cost of his father's crimes. Each name, each story, each life destroyed by greed and cowardice. This was the education David had never intended to give his son, a master class in the consequences of abandoning your principles. How many people in total, Ethan asked. 17 families, 42 individuals counting spouses and dependents. Total amount stolen, $4.2 million approximately. And how much did you spend on yourselves, this house, Mom's car, the renovations, the expensive dinners, the designer clothes? Veronica answered, this time her voice barely audible. About $600,000 over 3 years. $600,000 that belonged to elderly people who trusted you with their life savings. We were maintaining appearances, she said weakly. If we'd looked desperate, clients would have become suspicious. You were living high on stolen money while Mrs. Chen was rationing her medication, Ethan said with deadly quiet. You were planning European vacations while the Johnsons were choosing between heating their apartment and buying groceries. David looked up at his son through tear-swollen eyes. Ethan, I know I've made terrible mistakes, but I'm still your father. I still love you more than anything in the world. Do you? Because someone who loves me wouldn't destroy my future to save himself. Someone who loves me wouldn't lie to me for years about who he really is. Someone who loves me wouldn't plan to make me a criminal without my knowledge or consent. I was trying to protect you. You were trying to protect yourself, just like you were trying to protect yourself when you stole from Grandma and when you stole from your clients and when you planned to have her locked away in a psychiatric hospital. Ethan's voice was getting stronger, more confident. Everything you've done has been about saving yourself, and everyone else, including me, was expendable. I felt a surge of pride watching my grandson confront his father with such moral clarity. At 18, he was showing more courage and integrity than David had demonstrated in years. What happens now? Veronica asked, looking between Richard and me. What do you want from us? I want justice, I said simply. For Mrs. Chen, for the Johnsons, for all the other families you've destroyed, and for myself. Eleanor, please, David begged. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking for mercy. For Ethan's sake, if not for mine. Don't you dare use me as an excuse, Ethan said fiercely. Don't you dare try to hide behind my future when you were perfectly willing to destroy it last week. Richard cleared his throat. David, Veronica, you need to understand your legal situation. The evidence against you is overwhelming. The SEC has already referred the case for criminal prosecution. The FBI has opened an investigation into the money laundering and wire fraud charges. Local authorities are pursuing the elder abuse and forgery charges. You're looking at multiple felony convictions and substantial prison time. How substantial? Veronica asked. 15 to 20 years each, potentially. Maybe more if you're convicted of all charges. The color drained from both their faces. 20 years, David whispered. The victims' ages work against you, Richard continued. Elder abuse carries enhanced penalties. Financial crimes against vulnerable populations are prosecuted very aggressively. What if we cooperate, Ronnie? Veronica asked. What if we help recover money, testify against other people involved, make restitution so? Cooperation might reduce your sentences, but it won't eliminate them. The scope of your crimes is too extensive, the harm too severe, and the victims need to see justice done, I added. They need to know that stealing from elderly people has consequences. David looked at his son desperately. Ethan, what do you want me to do? Tell me how to fix the... You can't fix it, Dad. You can't give Mrs. Chen back her health or her home. You can't give the Johnsons back their farm or their dignity. You can't undo 3 years of lies and theft. Then what? You can tell the truth, all of it. You can cooperate with the authorities, help them recover whatever money is left, and accept responsibility for what you've done. And then you serve your time and try to become someone worth knowing again. The finality in Ethan's voice seemed to break something fundamental in David. He doubled over in his chair, sobbing with the desperate intensity of a man who had finally realized the full magnitude of his losses. I'll do whatever you want, he said between sobs. I'll cooperate with the investigation. I'll plead guilty. I'll testify against anyone else involved. Just please don't hate me forever. I don't hate you, Dad, Ethan said quietly. I hate what you've done and I hate who you've become, but I don't hate you. You're still my father, but you're not someone I can respect or trust anymore. Will you visit me in prison? Ethan was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. Maybe someday, when you've served your time and proven that you're committed to being honest. But Dad, the relationship we used to have, the trust, the admiration, the assumption that you were a good man trying to do right, that's gone. If we're going to have any relationship in the future, it's going to have to be built from scratch, based on truth instead of lies. Veronica, who had been unnaturally quiet during this exchange, suddenly stood up. This is insane. We're talking about destroying our entire lives, our marriage, our family, everything we've worked for. You already destroyed all of that, I pointed out. The question now is whether you're going to take responsibility or continue running from the consequences. There has to be another way, some kind of deal, some arrangement that doesn't involve prison time. Mom, Ethan said firmly, you stole over $4 million from elderly people. You tried to have Grandma declared insane and locked away. You were planning to kidnap me and make me a fugitive. There is no deal that gets you out of prison time. But what about your future? If your parents are convicted felons, how will that affect your college applications, your career prospects? It won't. Ethan replied with quiet confidence. Because I'm not responsible for your crimes. I'm going to finish my education, build a career based on honest work, and probably spend some time volunteering with organizations that help elder abuse victims. His words hit both parents like physical blows. Here was their son, the child they claimed to be protecting, turning their crimes into motivation for a lifetime of service to others. Ethan, I said gently, you don't have to carry that burden. You don't have to spend your life trying to atone for their mistakes. I want to Grandma. Someone needs to speak for people like Mrs. Chen and the Johnsons. Someone needs to make sure that other families don't go through what we've gone through. I felt tears streaming down my face, not tears of sadness, but tears of pride. My grandson had been betrayed by his own parents, had learned that his entire life had been built on lies and stolen money, and his response was to dedicate himself to helping others. There's something else you both need to know, Richard said, pulling out another folder of documents. The Costa Rica plan. The offshore accounts. The FBI has been monitoring those for weeks. If you had actually tried to flee the country, you would have been arrested at the airport. David and Veronica stared at him in shock. The investigation began when Mrs. Chen's daughter contacted the SEC about her mother's missing money. By the time you were forging Eleanor's deed, federal agents were already building a case against you. So even if your plan had worked perfectly, I added, even if you'd successfully stolen my money and had me committed, you still would have been caught. All of this suffering, all of this betrayal, all of this destruction, Ethan said slowly, was for nothing. You were never going to get away with it. The full futility of their scheme seemed to settle over David and Veronica like a heavy blanket. They had destroyed their family, betrayed their friends, and traumatized innocent people in pursuit of a plan that was doomed from the beginning. What happens now? David asked quietly. Now you cooperate with the investigation, Richard replied. You provide complete financial records, help authorities trace missing funds, and testify truthfully about your activities. In exchange, the prosecutor might recommend reduced sentences. How much time are we realistically looking at? With cooperation and guilty pleas, maybe 8 to 12 years each. Without cooperation, the full 20. David nodded slowly. I'll cooperate. I'll tell them everything. And I want full restitution for every victim, I added. Whatever money can be recovered goes to the people you stole from, not to legal fees or personal expenses. Of course. And I want written apologies to every victim acknowledging what you did and taking full responsibility. Yes. And David, I looked at my son directly, I want you to understand that our relationship is over. You will always be Ethan's father, and if he chooses to maintain contact with you, I'll support that decision. But you and I are done. You chose to betray me in the cruelest possible way, and I will never forgive that. David's face crumpled. Mom, please. No. You made your choice when you decided to steal from me. You made your choice when you tried to have me declared insane. You made your choice when you plotted to steal my home and destroy my relationship with my grandson. Those choices have consequences. The dinner that was supposed to celebrate their successful manipulation of an elderly woman ended with signed confessions, cooperation agreements, and the complete destruction of a family built on lies. By 10 o'clock that evening, David and Veronica had provided Richard with detailed financial records, lists of co-conspirators, and written apologies to their victims. 2 days later, they were arrested at their home and charged with 17 counts of securities fraud, multiple counts of elder abuse forgery, identity theft, and conspiracy. The local newspaper ran the story on the front page, Local Investment Advisor Arrested for Defrauding Elderly Clients. Within a week, the story had gone national. Financial news networks picked it up as an example of the growing problem of elder financial abuse. David's photograph appeared on television screens across the country, identified as the man who had stolen millions from retirees and tried to have his own mother institutionalized. Ethan handled the media attention with remarkable grace. He issued a single statement through Richard's office. I am horrified by my parents' actions and deeply sorry for the pain they have caused their victims. I will be cooperating fully with authorities and dedicating myself to helping prevent similar crimes in the future. 3 months later, David and Veronica pleaded guilty to all charges. In exchange for their cooperation in recovering stolen funds and testifying against other individuals involved in money laundering, they received sentences of 10 years each in federal prison. At the sentencing hearing, I was allowed to give a victim impact statement. I looked at my son sitting at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, barely recognizable as the man who had once been the center of my world. David Patterson was my only child, I began. I raised him alone after his father died, working 2 jobs to put him through college and support his early business ventures. I trusted him completely, loved him unconditionally, and believed in his fundamental goodness, even when evidence suggested otherwise. I paused, gathering my strength for what came next. The man sitting at that table systematically betrayed that trust. He stole from me, lied to me, manipulated me, and planned to have me declared insane and institutionalized so he could steal my life savings. He was willing to let me die alone and abandoned in a psychiatric facility to cover his business failures. David was crying openly, but I continued. But his betrayal of me is nothing compared to his betrayal of the 17 families who trusted him with their retirement security. Mrs. Chen, who is 82 years old and now can't afford her heart medication. The Johnsons, who lost their family farm and had to move into a studio apartment. The Rodriguezes, whose grandchildren's college funds disappeared into cryptocurrency speculation. I looked directly at David. These are the real victims of your crimes. Not me, I had the resources and support to fight back, but these elderly couples who had already lived through the Depression, who had saved every penny for their retirements, who trusted you with their futures, they may never recover from what you've done to them. When I finished, the judge thanked me for my statement and pronounced the sentence: 10 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation, forfeiture of all assets, lifelong ban from the securities industry. After the sentencing, Ethan and I walked out of the courthouse together. The media was waiting, but we ignored their questions and drove home in silence. "Are you okay?" I asked as we sat in my kitchen afterward. "I think so. It's strange I feel sad for them, but also relieved that it's finally over." "What are your plans now?" "I'm changing my major to criminology with a focus on white-collar crime. I want to understand how people like Dad become criminals and how to prevent it. And after college, law school maybe, or the FBI. I want to spend my life catching people who prey on the elderly and vulnerable." I smiled at him. "Your grandfather would be very proud of you." "What about you, Grandma? What are your plans?" I looked around my kitchen, the same kitchen where David had tried to destroy my life, now restored to its proper function as the heart of a home built on love rather than lies. "I'm thinking about teaching again. There's a literacy program at the community college that works with senior citizens, people who never learned to read properly or who lost their skills due to illness or injury." "That sounds perfect for you." "And I'm thinking about dating." Ethan's eyes widened. "Really? Richard has been very kind to me throughout this ordeal, and he's asked me to dinner several times." "Grandma, that's wonderful. You deserve to be happy." I reached across the table and took his hand. "We both do, sweetheart. We both deserve to build new lives based on truth and love instead of lies and fear." A year later, I married Richard in a small ceremony in Robert's Garden. Ethan walked me down the aisle and Martha Winters performed the service. David and Veronica were not invited, obviously, but I found myself thinking about them during the ceremony, wondering if they were learning anything from their time in prison, if they were becoming people worth knowing again. Ethan graduated with honors and was accepted into the FBI training program at Quantico. He specializes now in financial crimes against the elderly and he's become one of the youngest agents ever to lead a major white-collar crime investigation. The victims of David's scheme received partial restitution, about 60 cents on the dollar, from the liquidation of his assets and recovery of offshore accounts. It wasn't enough to fully restore their losses, but it helped. Mrs. Chen was able to move back into her own apartment. The Johnsons bought a small cottage near their old farm. As for me, I discovered that surviving betrayal and fighting for justice had given me a new sense of purpose. I began speaking at senior centers about financial fraud prevention, teaching elderly people how to protect themselves from predators like my own son. The literacy program at the community college became my new career. There's something deeply satisfying about helping someone learn to read at age 70, about watching their face light up when they successfully complete their first novel. Money can be stolen, relationships can be betrayed, and trust can be shattered. But resilience cannot be taken from you. Dignity cannot be forged or counterfeited, and the ability to start over to build something better from the ashes of what was destroyed belongs to anyone brave enough to claim it. I still live in the house Robert built, surrounded by his roses and the memories of a life well lived. Sometimes late at night, I think about the alternative reality where David's plan succeeded, where I died alone and forgotten in some sterile institution while he lived comfortably on my stolen money. Instead, I wake up each morning next to a man who loves me for who I am, not for what I can provide. I spend my days teaching people to read, helping them discover worlds they never knew existed. And I have a grandson who chose to transform his parents' crimes into motivation for a lifetime of service to others. Justice, it turns out, is not just about punishment. It's about restoration, redemption, and the courage to build something better from the wreckage of what was lost. It's about proving that love is stronger than greed, truth is more powerful than lies, and that sometimes the best revenge is living well. The betrayal that was meant to destroy me instead became the foundation for the happiest chapter of my life. And every morning when I wake up in my own bed, in my own house, surrounded by people who love me for who I truly am, I'm reminded that some victories are worth every moment of the fight required to win them.